Everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be the Game Week 27 cheat sheet. This week is an interesting week because I don't think there's too many decisions to be made in terms of transfers for a lot of managers. It's just about understanding that maybe a transfer this week can be quite impactful for Game Week 29. And so by prepping your transfers to have a player who has a good fixture in this week and then also in 29, I think that's the best way that you can set yourself up, because a lot of the transfers that we have made as managers recently have been into Arsenal players, some Bournemouth players. These are all teams who play in Game Week 29. You're now trying to shift out of maybe some Aston Villa players on this game week. You're also maybe looking for an opportunity or an avenue to sell a defender so that you can get 3 good defenders on Game Week 29. On top of that, I think it's the idea that you're also setting yourself up for Game Week 29 in the sense that you are maybe allowing yourself to keep an open eye towards an Erling Haaland, maybe a Marmoush, maybe even Bruno, if you don't want to go for Haaland as a captaincy option Game Week 29. So that's kind of what I would mention is the big macro topic, right? Planning ahead a little bit with your short-term transfers. So for Game Week 27, if you've never seen the cheat sheet series before, it's effectively a tier list of all players in every position based on price point in FPL. What I did mention as a big macroscopic shift last week was that a lot of the budget midfielders now provide a lot of insane value within the game, and you can almost get away with a very, very strong, well-rounded FPL team without having to spend too much money. And I think that is the same case that can be said very much so for the forwards. So to start with the midfielders, Noneri has an asterisk around him. I don't know whether the knock was actually very significant. I had a hilarious sort of interaction with a friend of mine who was sort of making the joke about how Noneri was sort of playing in the position of Saka with that sort of the limp off for the last 10 minutes of the game. Now, that's not a very serious comment, but I think he might have a knock. You never know. He's a younger player as well, so managers do have a tendency to try and protect them, but can he be protected, or do they have to play him? Because, you know, the alternative is playing Raheem Sterling, and that's not very great for footballing results. Arsenal have looked quite blunt, to be honest, and Arteta has called his team out for the lack of performance within the previous West Ham game. That was a home game as well. So almost a little bit hard to see that the results could be that much better away from home, but we'll be eagerly kind of anticipating that. I do think that Noneri still looked really good. The odds data and the model data still look strong for Arsenal, although I can see a little bit of regression in terms of how the market are appraising this Arsenal offense. And that's to be expected, right? With the amount of injuries that you have and that really, really poor performance versus West Ham. With Dango and Semenyo, I still hold them within the green tier. Now, I don't think Dango is quite as strong as we thought, because clearly there is now an information piece on Evan Nilsson sitting on the bench for that game versus Wolves. He did not feature in that game, so I do think that you have to think that he's not match fit, right? That's something that's very significant, because if you're not match fit as a player, it probably takes you a while to get back to full speed. There is no reason to necessarily throw the player back coming off an injury for a start, although it's possible, right? I think there's also been conflicting sports science documentation on whether maybe you just give someone a start, let them play 45, 60 minutes and sub them off. We've seen Spurs do that with Van de Ven, for example, although Van de Ven is also not very much close to playing football. I do think that Dango will play left wing, and his underlying stats were still very, very good when he was playing within the left wing position. So I don't have too many concerns over Dango as a pick. I do think Semenyo at this point, though, is much, much safer. So you might actually enjoy Semenyo instead as a future transfer. So if you are, let's say, not invested into the Bournemouth, you might want to just skip the Bournemouth mid this week anyways, right? Because it's Brighton away. It's not a particularly good fixture. You can reconsider them when they play a team like Tottenham. Neto is the interesting pick for this week, in my opinion, because he was playing center forward versus Aston Villa. He played the full game, and Nkunku played left wing and was subbed. And I think part of this too is Nkunku's played really, really poor recently. And you're starting to see that Maresca is almost trying to find different ways of playing with the current selection of players that he has, so much so that he's making a few tweaks in terms of positions. And Nkunku has suffered as a result of that. So I do think that the upside theoretically versus Southampton versus Leicester just isn't there for me. I'm giving Nkunku a drop and I'm giving Neto a new. Now this could change, right? Who knows if people can change their positions in Game 27, but I think in a way, the experiment with Neto worked, and I think he'll probably continue playing center forward. So I just think that Nkunku is just a bit capped. Maybe he comes back and gets a positional shift in Game Week 28, but then by that time, you already have Game Week 29 versus Arsenal, and there's just not that much upside. In the next tier, we have Trossard getting a drop. This is just simply because with these Bournemouth and Arsenal players, the immediate fixtures aren't amazing. And this is just a reflection of that. So that's why Trossard gets the drop, but his minutes still look really, really healthy. His underlying stats actually versus West Ham were still pretty strong. So I don't think you have too much to be concerned about with Trossard, because the minutes still look really good for him. And in the midweek game, it's not like any Arsenal players are coming back to the team. In the next tier, though, I think what is actually most interesting is actually Bowen is one of the best options to go for this week, because Bowen only really has a bad fixture in the distance in Gaming 32. All the other fixtures are, I would say, average. And you can already see that he's performed in some really tough games. And he's the clear talisman for this West Ham team, as well as has just generally good underlying stats historically. So Bowen for me is a top pick as of this game week. Can you spend the amount of money to go towards Bowen? That's probably a different question. But I really like Bowen for people who are going for a wildcard 31, because actually, yeah, as I said, the fixtures are just really good heading on towards that window. And Bumo remains as a top option. Gordon is a differential. Luis Diaz I've taken out of the cheat sheet because you now have Gakpo back. And then Bruno I've given a rise in the next tier, because Bruno, one thing I can say for him is that he's maintained his underlying stats quite well within the DM position. He's also the most important player in the team, and that if United were ever to get a result, I think he must be involved in some sort of way. So even though he's playing, yeah, a lot of the portion of future games in the DM position, you can argue that for United to get anything going, he must be involved, and he's just absolutely nailed for bonus points as a result of that, right? The reason why he effectively took one good shot, scored a free kick, and then actually got triple bonus is because he's just involved in so many actions within the game. Whereas I don't think you can say that to someone like Odegaard, who just simply has been extremely unflattering as a player, doesn't have the same control of the games, doesn't have the same sort of bonus potential, although is also on penalties, but is not on something like direct free kicks. And if Noneri is playing, is not on these right-hand side corners. The next tier is Foden and Son. These are still decent players, but with poor fixtures, I would say. Foden has actually really been really poor for me recently. I'm not very intrigued with him. Son, we've mentioned, it has been an interesting case where he's played a lot of minutes so far. I think he's almost played himself back into shape, but also he's just forced to play a lot of minutes. The fixtures aren't amazing, but he does play all the fixtures, including Gaming 29, which is a pretty tough game. If you own Son, I can understand the appeal of wanting to keep him, but I would still probably avoid going for him. With Palmer, I think he's a captaincy option for Gaming 27. I'm sure a lot of people will disagree because he's actually just been on a generational run of blanks, and you can see the market sort of correcting against that. But I still think he's an amazing pick within the game, simply because of Southampton and Leicester. You can reconsider after that, but I think I would still encourage you to keep him in your team for these two games. And then in the next tier within the forwards, we have Beto being reintroduced, João Pedro being reintroduced. I actually myself went into Beto, so I'm not quite sure why I took him out of the cheat sheet last week. And actually, no, sorry, this is just a mistake with me not being able to read my own graphics. But Beto is one of the top options. João Pedro is reintroduced as a new top option, but there's a major asterisk around João Pedro. I did not know about the Welbeck injury or the knock. Clearly, that's because Fabian Hertzler never gives us information on certain players. But with João Pedro, I think the biggest thing to look forward to is, is he going to play within the 10 position if Welbeck comes back? Is Welbeck going to come back at all? Those 2 points need answers. We're probably not going to get the right answers from Fabian, but I think there's a pretty high chance that he can play versus Bournemouth at home. And crucially, of course, if he continues to play well, like he did in the Southampton game, maybe there's a chance for him to suddenly start benching Rutter back, and maybe he can keep his spot within the team, and so on and so forth. So that's something to look forward to, and I think that's quite interesting. If you're an owner here, you might actually be able to enjoy João Pedro. And that's part of the reason why I kept him as well within my own team, but I think there is a major asterisk where we could still very much see things go back to normalcy where he's suddenly benched. In the next two tiers, we have Marmoush getting a rise, and that's because you've come off of a Liverpool fixture, so I do think Marmoush gets a deserved increase. With Haaland being out of the squad, I actually really wonder whether he's going to be available for the midweek game. I've seen FPL Main Road mention, and this is a City sort of inside the know type of person within X mentioning that Haaland might be back for Tottenham, but you never know if he's going to start that game. Marmoush could very much be on penalties, and he's on a lot of set pieces, which I think is new information for the City team, as in he'll be on a lot of free kicks. We saw the great assist with versus Real Madrid as well within the Champions League. I think he's generally a really good player. Why he's getting subbed a little bit earlier is a little bit surprising to me. I would think that he deserves to still play 90 minutes, similar to Foden. So we'll have to kind of monitor that, but I think his baselines are very, very healthy, very strong, and he's not facing Liverpool soon, so he's going to be a really good pick. For the next two, we're going to give Isak a drop, and this is simply because of the fixtures to come, right? Liverpool is a tough game, and then West Ham is actually a pretty good game, but then you've got a blank in Gaming 28. So this is just reflecting the fact that Isak has a blank. There's nothing else to it. I think you can consider selling Isak maybe if you want as a manager, but there's also a really good reason to keep him, and his ownership is still absolutely sky high for a good reason, and that's that. With Watkins, he gets a drop because same reason really. Fixtures are slightly better than Isak's, but he's also an inferior pick towards Isak in my opinion. And you can see that just based on the underlyings, based on the team strengths as well. And also, I think Watkins might have come off with a knock within that Chelsea game, although I'm not sure. Emery will probably give us information, and I think Watkins will be ready to go again within the midweek, but that's that. Now with Haaland, we'll find out when he comes back, and when he comes back, I think it's more so a case of we wait till game week 29 to bring him into our teams. In the defense, we don't have too many changes. I've added Colwell just simply because he's got 2 good games in a row, and you might actually prioritize that because you might be sort of looking for a player who at least plays in game week 29 and then can actually cover whatever your weaknesses are in defense for the next 2 game weeks, which is unlikely, but it could be possible. Cucurella is an option too. He's much more attacking than Colwell, but he also costs a lot more money that I probably wouldn't spend as much within the Chelsea defense. I actually think that the pick that I like the most in terms of cheap defenders is actually going to be in the next tier, in that 4.5 plus tier, where Dorgu is a very lively Man United player. Mazraoui seemingly has an injury, and so it's very much possible that Dorgu will actually play 90 minutes in this next match here, which is very crucial because it's actually the best game for this game week when it comes to getting some upside from a Man United defender, and also someone who has crucially a really nice game week 29 where they get to face off versus Leicester, who we know have been completely flat as of late. So I think Dorgu is actually quite a nice pick. Is he my favorite fullback from Man United just watching them play? Yes, he is. But do they have some absolutely shambolic players who are not able to make use of the opportunities that he's creating? Also, yes. So it comes down to how bad do you think United are, how good do you think Dorgu is, and how bad do you think their opponents are? And that's pretty much what it comes down to. With Ait-Nouri, I think there's actually been a genuine shift within this Wolves team with a noticeable sort of improvement in terms of level of defense from Gary O'Neill onwards towards Pereira. I've seen a lot of team strength models reflect that as well as markets. Now, 11-5, my friend, has actually mentioned that his model has not reacted so much within the Wolves defense, but once again, they posted a really good result in the weekend versus Bournemouth, and that can move the needle a lot. And Ait-Nouri, as we know, is a huge pro, very much like Munoz, because he's a very attacking-minded fullback, and very much like Hull, when the fixtures are right, you'd expect for someone to be able to thrive within those sorts of games. So Ait-Nouri does get a rise. With Housen, he gets a fall, and that's simply just fixture-driven. We've come off of some good Bournemouth games, some good Arsenal games as well. And Van Heck is also a new option because I think the Brighton defense actually looks quite solid. So I'd just like to reflect that he's a decent option. Not great in the sense that game week 29 is good for him. Kirk is similar to Housen, and then Virgil get a drop because of the impending double, or rather the blank, and that's just a reflection of that. And that's pretty much it. I still have the Arsenal defense as elite options, and part of this is because the staying power of an Arsenal defender is very much there. I think if you're still asking for clean sheets, they're probably still the best team to be able to deliver that to you. The less attacking they get, I suppose, the more it leads to potential outcomes where defenders actually get the most amount of points within this Arsenal team. So that's a little bit of a pro as well to players like Saliba and Gabriel, who play really good minutes, are very likely to get good bonus if Arsenal go deep into games and actually keep a clean sheet. So that's part of the sort of impact there. And they do play in game week 29 crucially, unlike their Liverpool counterparts, who are also similarly sort of expensively priced, but do blank in game week 29. Now, Arsenal don't have, let's say, as good a fixture as Southampton at home within the distance like Liverpool, but coming out of game week 29, Arsenal actually have some pretty good games as well. So that's just generally reflecting that overall curve. In the goalkeeper tier list, just to round things out, because this is a very, very quick cheat sheet this week, and not too much has changed. I think, our understanding of teams haven't changed too much. We've been looking at these fixtures for a long time now, and there haven't been sort of any sort of changes in terms of fixtures that make us think twice about how we approach transfers. The only changes are really just to reflect sort of price points of players. Leno gets a drop because of just the fixture run coming for Fulham. Same with Pickford. With Alisson, it's just a drop to reflect the blank as well. And that's pretty much it for the cheat sheet. I think there's a lot of cheap goalkeepers right now who are very strong, who can provide you really serious value over the next few weeks. Do you need to spend that sort of money on Raya? It's up to you. And it really comes down to, I think we have enough money to spend on someone like Raya if you want to go for a goalkeeper, and that's pretty much what it comes down to. And even if, let's say, you're looking at someone like Alisson, or you're looking at someone like, let's say, some of the other players that I've dropped with the Newcastle and Liverpool, or even Aston Villa, if you have the ability to rotate around game week 29, clearly those players are more important than I've reflected here. If you're free hit 29ing, clearly the players that you own within Newcastle and Liverpool are more important than I've reflected within the cheat sheet. So just do stay cognizant towards that. The last closing comment that I'll make actually within the midfield is, I think a lot of people questioned why Rodgers was off the cheat sheet last week. That's simply because I just didn't value the fixtures for Aston Villa coming out of the double. And I also don't value his underlying stats compared to some of his peers within this price point. Rodgers is still a very good player, very much passes the eye test for me. But I think there's so many more new threats within this Aston Villa team as well, which also actually dulls his appeal, right? Because when you think about FPL, it's also a case where usually if you're the more dominant option within your team, you're going to get more avenues towards bonus, routes towards getting sort of these holes, and the proverbial ceiling is there. And that argument sort of applies to Bruno whilst United is regressing as a team. So in order to reflect that, Rodgers is off the cheat sheet. I hope that doesn't offend too many people, but that's pretty much it. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you guys have a wonderful week ahead. Take care, goodbye, and I'll see you guys soon.